welcome. We have a nice group in here, so this is absolutely awesome. Um, Thank you for joining on our rental training here today. I can talk about rentals forever, so I'm going to do my best to really cover the main changes we've seen recently and hit a few really just highlight items for every single one of you. We will definitely go ahead and keep this under an hour. And just so you know, this is being recorded. So if you have to jump off early, no worries. We're going to have this sent out pretty quickly to everybody. It's going to be sent to all your office managers, your MBs, and we will also have this uploaded, I believe, to Ad Academy. So it will be there as a resource and a reference for you. We also are going to be sending out some very short videos on each of the topics we're covering today. So you'll be able to have that as like a quick cheat video, if you will, if you ever actually need it. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get started. Hopefully everybody's enjoying the day. It's gorgeous outside. It feels like spring, quasi summer, although I think it's only going to last a day and then that's it. So I want you to go ahead and take down my email address, paulblackburn@atproperties.com. You all have amazing, incredible managing brokers out there. I manage two offices. I got the Goose Island and the North Center office, if you don't know me, but I also have the rental division. So anything that I can do to alleviate some of the stress from some of your managers when it comes to questions about rentals, feel free to reach out to me directly, or feel free to CC me on any questions that maybe you send your MB. So I'm going to go ahead and just toss that out there. So here are the topics we're going to go ahead and cover today. The one thing I just kindly ask of all of you is I'm going to, at the end of each topic, I will open it up for some questions. So I would just say, if you can, just wait until I get to the end of that topic to ask the questions, and it'll make it a lot more efficient for me to kind of go through them. I'll do my best to answer them on the call. In the event I don't get to them, please email it to me. There's some I may not answer because I may feel that in answering the question, it may create unneeded confusion for the group. So in that case, just send me an email and then we can go ahead and either email or jump on the phone and answer it directly with you. So let's go ahead and do this. So here are the topics we are going to be covering today. We're going to be talking about the new tenant agency agreements and why those are important and required. And we're going to talk about just some finesse and actually asking your clients to go ahead and sign them. When we talk about getting paid when representing tenants, all right, how do we get paid post August 17th? It's a little bit different than working with buyers. So we're going to walk through that. We'll talk about the rental listing agreements, all right? And we'll talk about a couple changes there. They're pretty minor. And once you understand what we got, you're going to feel comfortable, but I do want to explain that to you. We're going to talk about the new change in the 2025 Illinois application fee law, okay? And if you've read the change, you may be thinking, what in the world is this? It sounds scarier than it is. So it's really not much for us to really worry about at all. So I'm going to walk you through it and give you some good pointers on exactly how you should be handling this and explaining it to your landlords, as well as to your tenants. We're going to talk about a couple changes in the Chicago apartment lease, but this is really an Illinois law change that we're going to really see across the board on all different leases. The Chicago apartment lease just did a really good job of presenting it, so that's why I'm going to be sharing that one. And then we're going to be just doing some quick reminders on fair housing and some consistency on application requirements, all right, to keep you out of trouble and to make sure that you are really advising your clients in the right way. So let's jump into it. So tenant agency, all right, just like we have our buyer broker agreements that were required to be signed, the same is true with tenant agency agreements. Now, it became a National Association of Realtors rule, right, to go ahead and get buyer broker agreements signed on August 17th. But on January 1st, it became a law for the IDFPR for buyer broker agreements. And when they made that change in the law, guess what? They also made the change with tenants, meaning if you're working with a tenant, guess what? You have to go ahead and get that agreement signed. So here's a few quick highlight items with that. Our tenant agency agreement that we have mirrors the requirements that are in the exclusive buyer broker agreement. So it's really pretty similar, okay? It must be signed by the tenants, by all tenants. So if you have roommates moving in together, you want to make sure you get every single one on that agreement, okay? It has to be signed prior to actually showing, just like on the buy side. It must have specific compensation mentioned. And what do I mean by specific? I mean, it must say half a month's rent, 1 month's rent, a specific dollar amount. It cannot just be blanket and open saying whatever the building or whatever the landlord is offering. But we do have a workaround with some of the language I'll explain to you on that. It must be area specific. Ours is for Illinois, all right, just as all of Illinois, so that's what's in there. And then we do have an additional language section where you can go ahead and you can add some additional terms to maybe go ahead and make your tenants feel a bit more comfortable. So we will go ahead and talk about what you can do there. All right, so the new Illinois Tenant Representation Agreement, that's the title. So if you want to search for it under printable docs, all right, that's the title you're going to see it under at, just there. I'm going to show you the compensation paragraph because that is really the crux of this. And that is the one piece that's a little bit different than our exclusive buyer broker agreement. So in the compensation paragraph, we have section A. And section A is the non-refundable retainer fee. Some brokers like doing a retainer fee when they are working with tenants. Most honestly do not. It is totally up to you and how you want to handle this in your business. What I do ask and what I do recommend is that you are consistent in the way that you are doing this, right? So if you are charging a retainer fee for one, I would say charge it for all. Keeps things easier, all right, when it comes to discrimination complaints or anything along those lines. So be consistent in the way that you are doing it. If you have any questions about that, reach out and we can talk about the specific scenario on whether or not it is actually okay to go ahead and do that. Know that the retainer fee itself is non-refundable. Okay, it's non-refundable. Once they pay that, that is it. That goes into your pocket, but it is credited out of the commission that you may or may not receive from the listing side. Okay, or it will be credited towards any commission owed by the tenant. Works the same exact way as it does on the buy side. Now, line B, that's the important line. This is where you're going to basically write in what it is that you are charging. Now, if we go back to pre-August 17th days, right, and we had a rental listing on the MLS, what was most common? Most common is what we saw as a half month's rent, right? So you can go ahead and you can write that in there if that's what you want to charge. That is what we're seeing a lot of brokers charge on the tenant representation side. However, just like our buyer broker agreements, you cannot collect more compensation than is written in your agreement, right? So like on the buy side, for instance, if you have a 2.5% buyer broker agreement, and for whatever reason, the list side is saying, we'll pay you 3%, you're not able to collect that extra half a point unless the agreement is amended, right? So same thing with the rental side of things. You cannot collect more. Now, if you are dealing with solely MLS listings, most landlords are accustomed to paying a half a month's rent, okay? So you're probably not going to run into that problem. However, if you have a tenant that you are showing a lot of rental buildings to, managed buildings. So specifically, this will pertain to a lot of what we see here in the downtown Chicago area, or the near south side or the near north side, right? These buildings sometimes will pay 75% or 1 month's rent. Okay, so if you are going to be showing a lot of those buildings, it's really important that we go ahead and we put 1 month's rent in there to allow you to go ahead and collect that. And I'll explain a way that you can explain it to the tenants so they don't feel like they're on the hook for that. Now, under that portion, part of paragraph B or section B is you have 2 checkboxes, okay? And you can either check this box here, box A, saying that, hey, your tenant allows you to show all properties regardless of compensation, or B, hey, don't show me any properties that do not meet this compensation. We used to have this in our old buyer broker agreements, and then we removed it. In this case, we added it into the tenant side because it was the one thing that we saw a lot of our tenant brokers asking for. And we also realized that on the rental side, things are a bit different. Tenants are a bit more sensitive when it comes to what they're looking at, a bit more sensitive to worrying if they're going to have to come out of pocket to pay somebody because they just don't have maybe that amount of cash. And also, unlike the buy side, where we could really kind of wrap things into the purchase price, you really don't have that ability on the rental side. So that's why we wanted to basically give this option to all of you as a way to go ahead and make your tenants feel a bit more comfortable. And we'll get to questions here in a second. So at the end of our tenant agreement, we have paragraph 13. This is additional provisions, okay? This is where you can write in anything that your heart desires that actually fits within the law, okay? And we can let you be flexible with this depending on your business model and depending if it actually really does make sense for you. Couple things that can be added in here. Sometimes we can make things property specific, right? So maybe you're going out with a tenant and you're only looking at 5 places and they don't want to sign necessarily an exclusive with you for whatever reason, but you want to ensure that you are getting paid on 5 properties and you want to comply with the IDFPR law. You can write those 5 properties in here, okay? You also can write in language if you have a tenant that is worried about you saying that you're going to be asking for 1 month commission, okay? So let's say you want to put 1 month commission in your agreement because you know that you're going to be showing them a lot of rental buildings. And those rental buildings are pretty open about paying a 1 month commission. And you want to make sure you're able to go ahead and collect that. Here is something that we've been advising people write in when their tenants have said, yeah, but what if, I rent something off the MLS and it's only a half a month commission. I don't want to be, on the hook for an extra $1,000 or $2,000 to you. You can write in something such as the following. In the event that compensation offered by landlord is less than 1 month's rent, At Properties agrees to reduce compensation to X. So that X can be anything. It can be a half a month. It can be a flat amount. Whatever it is that kind of works for your business model, all right, you can go ahead and you can put that in there. This is essentially a way for you to have your cake and eat it too. We don't really advise this a lot on the buy side. That's kind of a different animal. But this really does comply with just the way that the rental market operates and the way tenants actually think. So that is the basics right there of the agency agreement. It mirrors the buyer agreement. So if you're familiar with the buyer broker agreement, awesome. You're going to be in really, really good shape with this one. It's just now you are explaining this to a tenant. So let's quickly jump through some questions we have right now. And let's see what we have here. Move-in fees, security deposit ordinance. We're not going to cover too much about that today. That would be like in a separate training, but by all means, Lisa, feel free to email me directly and we can go ahead and definitely go over some of those specifics. But also, Lisa, like you just read in 1 month's rent. And it seems like you are having, not much of an issue with that. So awesome. Love to hear that. Guido, you say there's 2 rentals that are paying 150%. Yeah, there are going to be those scenarios. So if you are seeing that in the rental market moving forward, and it kind of fluctuates depending on season, right? We may see, for instance, in the off season, 150% being paid by these rental buildings. And then come the spring market, they're dropping things down to 100% or maybe only half a month's rent. Explain to your tenants how that works. Explain why you're writing that in there. And then add that, that additional little line into the additional provisions to go ahead and keep your tenants feeling like they're not on the hook for that additional amount. You cannot put a range. Thank you so much, Trish, for asking that question. You are not able to put a range for compensation in there. This is just coming from our attorney. We believe that the way we read the law from the IDFPR, they want something specific, just like they want something specific on the buy side. They want the same thing on the tenant side. Megan, she asks, since there's no compensation listed on the MLS, if we do have a tenant that only wants to see things that meet their criteria, how do we go ahead and do that? That's a great question. I'm not a huge fan of checking off that box. I'm a huge fan of checking off the box of, hey, show me everything. And what I will do is if I come across a property where I know I'm not being compensated at all, I will let you know, right? I will let you know ahead of time, and we can figure out how to go ahead and address that situation. So that's my personal preference. What I like about having the boxes in there is it really forces us to really, I think, have a more in-depth conversation about compensation with our tenants and really start explaining the options. And it also, I believe, makes the tenants feel like they are actually, they are actually in control. Let's see. We have a question here. Are we able to provide a concrete answer on compensation being offered on a rental listing if asked? We will get to that actually, but the short answer to that is actually yes. Yes, but we will definitely get to that. If someone has a buyer broker agreement with a rental amount filled in and decides to now rent, do we have to also use the Illinois tenant rep agreement? John, no, you do not. Our buyer broker agreement, as long as you have that filled in, that rental portion on there, that fully protects you, so you are good to go. Thank you for asking that question, John. Great question. Let's see. If they check do not show tenant properties that do not offer the commission, okay, do we have to basically reach out to each listing individually and kind of confirm compensation? In theory, yes, Jeremy. Like if they actually check that and that's what they truly want, that's in theory kind of what you have to do. So I really encourage you to do the opposite. Check the box that says shows me everything and say you'll do your best to confirm compensation prior to. But you may have some tenants that are like, no, I want you to double confirm everything before seeing it. I think those are kind of few and far between, but you definitely may come across them. All right, awesome. So thanks for all the questions. We got, let's see, one or two more right here. If they signed a tenant rep agreement prior to, do they have to sign a new one? No. So we have the new ones out there, which I like better, but no. If it was signed back in December or whatever, or even before then, it does meet the standard requirements. So you do not need to get a new one signed. Can you type something specific? Let's say a half a month for first month's for MLS properties, or first month's rent for managed rental buildings, and kind of segment it out that way. So that's something we've kind of gone back and forth on with our attorney. I'll try to get you a concrete answer to see if we legally can go ahead and do that. There's been a little bit of debate on that because it does give a range when you do it that way, but it's also semi-property specific, right? So Bobby, I'll work on getting you a specific answer for that. Can we negotiate the commission to be paid over the 12-month lease? Done that by, it's a great question, and we sometimes see this a little bit in the commercial realm. I would definitely not recommend that. We don't want to be in the habit of chasing down commission over a 12-month process, whether it be from the tenant or whether it be from the landlord. So I definitely would not recommend that. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. With the next topic, but one question that just popped is if you're on the list side and somebody comes in and wants to see your property, do you have to go ahead and get a tenant rep agreement signed with those tenants? And the answer is no. You are able to go ahead and show a property as a courtesy to the owner without having an agreement signed by that tenant. We do, of course, strongly recommend a no agency agreement in that situation, especially if they start asking questions. You really have to go ahead and segment the fact that you represent the landlord and not them. Sorry, we will get to that MLS fee question here in a bit. So thanks for asking that. All right, let's move on. So getting you paid when you're representing the tenants, okay? Getting you paid. This is the thing I think a lot of you have had questions about, because how do we actually confirm that, guess what, I'm going to walk away with a paycheck, and how do I deal with the other broker on the other side when we're on the tenant side? So here's what you got to remember. You must have something in writing between you and the list brokerage or the landlord in order to guarantee payments. Here's the good thing. The good thing. Right now, we are seeing all the major companies and all the companies that are major on the rental side, for the most part, playing very, very nice. Still cooperating, still encouraging their landlords to go ahead and pay compensation. And we'll talk about that in a bit of why that's a good idea to go ahead and encourage your landlord to do. But we are definitely still seeing that. That is the good news. However, at the same time, we have to be diligent and protect ourselves, because at the end of the day, there's no guarantee. So you must get something in writing. What are we currently seeing to confirm things in writing? This is the one instance where broker-to-broker agreements are still acceptable, okay? Where one brokerage agrees to pay the other brokerage. And the reason being is it's just the way the rental transaction works. Is where the first month's rent typically gets paid. It keeps it easy, it keeps it cleaner to basically still run things through the brokerage. And that is why we are still seeing broker-to-broker agreements signed. We also are seeing a combination of an agreement that may list both broker to broker as well as broker to landlord. That is how ours is set up. And I'll walk you through that one and explain the nuances of that agreement. And something else we are starting to see is actually lease addendums specifying payments to the brokerage. I saw one the other day and it actually was really nice and really clean. It mirrored, okay, it mirrored basically the way our compensation addendum to the contract looks. And this was attached to the lease. And it basically was the landlord confirming that they were going to make the tenant's brokerage whole and gave a specific amount. And it was being signed by the tenant as well as by the landlord. And it was being added as an addendum to the lease. I thought that was very clean and very cool looking. I've actually sent that over to our in-house counsel to see if that's something that maybe we should present as an option. We want to be really careful with things like that, though, because when it comes to Chicago tenant ordinance and the lease, right, there's a lot of very specific, tricky laws. So we want to make sure that we're just being above board, but you might see that. So let's look at what our new brokerage compensation agreement looks like on the rental side. We're going to break this up into a couple different slides here. The top portion is very simple. This can be used if you are on the list side or on the tenant side, provided that the other side is okay signing this, okay? This works great. You put the listing broker information in there, the tenant's broker information in there, you put the property in there, and then you put the name of the tenant that's there, right? So we have all the pertinent information that we need to go ahead and have in this agreement. The next part really starts going over what the compensation actually is. And again, this really mirrors very similar our compensation addendum to the purchase contract, okay? Line number one basically says, hey, you know, listing broker has an agreement with the landlord of the property and is authorized to go ahead and market the property and do all of that. The tenant's broker, at the end of the day, is going to be entitled, all right, to a certain amount of compensation. But what we've added here is who is actually paying, right? We've added, is it going to be the listing broker paying the compensation or the landlord paying the compensation? You then put the compensation amount in there and you are good to go, all right? Line 3 basically has you put a number of days in there. And the reason just being for this scenario right here, just in case, for instance, the application doesn't get approved or something along those lines, we do want this agreement to expire at a certain point in time. So this is left blank, which is what I've seen most people do. It just expires in 30 days, okay? That's the great thing about this. This allows the landlord to confirm that they're paying the commission or allows the listing broker to confirm that they're paying the commission. Here's the section right here where we have signatures, okay? If it is the listing brokerage paying the commission, then we need the listing broker signature and the listing managing broker signature on there, okay? If it is the landlord paying the compensation, you only need the landlord signature and then, of course, the tenant signature on there, okay? That is all you need. Keeps it very, very simple. We basically put two forms into one when it comes to this. We've seen this used a lot on our side when we are representing landlords. We can pre-sign these in certain circumstances. I'll explain when we can go ahead and do that. And that can be something that you can send over to a tenant's broker that's inquiring about compensation, and they already have something in writing confirming that fact. Couple reminders for getting paid, and then we'll get to the questions. And this is just logistically how we are seeing things work in the rental side of the business. You want to confirm compensation with the listing agent as soon as you can, okay? As soon as you can. What we're seeing right now is we're kind of seeing a combination of things out there. and this is just what I'm hearing from my people in the rental division, when they are scheduling showings, a lot of times the listing agents are being proactive in basically sending out, yeah, no worries, we're paying a half a month's rent, or we're paying this. They are being forthright with this. It is really good to go ahead and get this in writing, even if it's a simple email or a simple text message. Okay. If you're showing a managed building, okay, if you're showing a building managed by a company like Bozzuto or Related, Peak, et cetera, it's really important that you just confirm somehow in writing with them what that compensation is. They are so used to doing that because they were never on the MLS before, these managed buildings, at least most of them. So they were always used to basically explaining what their going rate is, what they are paying. Okay. It's really important for you to remember that if you are working with a managed building, again, one of those larger high rises, like I mentioned, they're not going to sign our form. And that is okay. They usually have open brokerage agreements with us confirming how they pay us. And they usually also will let you know what you need to do to get paid, how you have to invoice them. If you have any questions on that, reach out to me directly. Happy to walk you through that process, okay? But it's also important to know that those buildings, those managed buildings, take a little while to pay. You might be waiting 60, 90 days or even a bit longer to go ahead and receive payment. And that's just the way that they operate. In exchange, they're usually paying more, right? They're paying like 100%, or as Guido said, right, 150% in some cases. So it's just the price that you have to pay, that waiting game, sometimes for that additional compensation from them. But it's really important for you to remember, get as much in writing as possible. I realize the rental market moves very, very fast. And there's going to be situations to where you honestly may just have to go ahead and take a risk in some scenarios, and maybe take the risk of a listing broker's word. I don't want to see you always do that, but those scenarios, if you deal with a lot of renters, let's be honest, they are going to come up. At the end of the day, all you can do is be as diligent as possible, with your paperwork. All right, so let's get to some chats here. We have a bunch of things in here. So I'm going to go ahead and start working through some of them here. Again, if I miss you, I apologize. Go ahead and please do send me an email with them. Phyllis, do we have a lease addendum form that we can use for our rental listings? That's coming up next. And the answer is yes, we do. Can we share that that addendum that we have there, or that compensation agreement? Yes, 100%. So even if you are on you could be on either side of the transaction. If you want to send that over to somebody else on the other side of the transaction to use, by all means, you can go ahead and do that. We'll begin to list side stuff here in a bit. Is this only Illinois? I'm only covering Illinois stuff right now. That's primarily what we're focused on. What I can tell you is we, especially when it comes to landlord tenant law, we're some of the strictest. So as we start getting into things, we will definitely be some of the strictest. Are these forms required in order to submit a deal in the DMS? So really what we want to see in the DMS right now is going to be that tenant agency agreement. That's going to be the main thing. A broker-to-broker agreement is really what we want to see in there. Anything else that you have to go ahead and confirm what the payment is, there's other things we can go ahead and take, Christina. So this will be kind of a thing we'll be learning over the next couple of months as a bunch of new rentals kind of come in. We're going to do our best to streamline this because we do thousands of rentals. So we're going to make it as easy as possible for you when it comes to the paperwork on that. Let's see. I think I answered some of these questions as I was going through things. At what point of the transaction is this compensation agreement introduced? Is it the type of lease signing, or is it maybe alongside your clients when they're submitting the application? I say it is as soon as you are able to do it. The sooner, the better. And look, there's going to be some scenarios. If you're dealing with a reputable broker that says, hey, we are paying on this, here's our compensation, they send it to you in writing. In that case, I'm going to feel a lot more laid back, right? In being able to go ahead and get that compensation agreement signed at the time of lease signing, or maybe when I know the application is being approved or something along those lines. It honestly is going to become more of an art form versus a science at the end of the day. A lot of times what we are starting to see are brokers preemptively sending over a compensation agreement already signed on their side with the application or with the application link. So you may get an application link, and then boom, here's the attachment with the compensation agreement establishing what the compensation is. I saw that a few days ago, like from Dreamtown, they were doing a great job of getting those things sent out. So we're going to see that kind of across the board. But that, I would say, in a perfect world, is the way it really kind of should operate. Greg, can the compensation agreement be uploaded to the additional docs in the MLS? Great question. The answer is no. We cannot upload anything into the MLS regarding compensation, even under additional docs. That becomes an automatic, at this point, $2,500 fine. So okay, I think I have gone through most of them. Zoe, on the rental folder with the tenant agency agreements, basically being able to create one and send it directly through that. If you're not able to yet, that will be a feature coming soon. So thank you for asking that. Yes, we should not have an issue with that. As a listing agent, At tells us not to say what the compensation is. We're going to be getting to that, and we're going to be walking through that actually, Debbie, in the next section. So thanks for asking that. That is a great question. Definitely something I want to go ahead and talk about. So I think I covered most. If I missed you, I really do apologize. Copy and paste, toss it into an email to me right now, and we will go ahead and I will respond to you. No problem at all. So new exclusive marketing agreements. We have this now on the rental side. We've had to make changes to it, right? Obviously, because of what has happened. So I'm going to walk you through the changes. They're basic. They're not scary. Do not worry. So right now we have a 1 month's rent commission minimum. We have not altered our agreements to only be on the list side and make it a half a month. We have it as 1 month's rent, and here is the reason why. If you are being dual agent, right, on this, or no agency on a lease, you are taking on a lot more risk, a lot more hassle, even more so than a sale, in my opinion. And we want to see you compensated for that. Also, at the end of the day, a lot of brokers do like to kind of double bubble things when it comes to the rental side of things. And we want to make sure that they are being compensated for that extra work. So our new listing agreements still have 1 month rent as minimum commission. $100 admin fee. There is a $100 admin fee, all right, that we've always had in our rental agreements going back, I think, 10, 12 years. That is still in there. That has not changed. There is, however, no more MLS fee. If you remember, on the rental side, you would have, let's say we'd be paying out a half month's rent. We would take an MLS fee of $150. We are no longer doing that. Some other brokerages still are. And honestly, there's nothing we can kind of do about that on the rental side, because we are still signing a lot of broker to broker agreements on the rental side, right? So other brokerages are still doing that. We are not. We do not want you doing that. We see there's really no point in doing that. There is verbiage in our standard rental listing agreement that states the landlord may be requested to pay tenant's broker commission. They're not obligated. It's always negotiable, but they may be asked to pay. So we do have that language in there. I'll show that to you. And it's the same similar language that we have on our sale listing agreements. And as somebody asked in the chat, yes, we do have an addendum to the listing agreement to confirm compensation to the tenant's broker and to give you permission to go ahead and state what that compensation is. So this is what the addendum to the listing agreement looks like. That is going to allow you to basically scream from the rooftops, if you want to, what the compensation is for a tenant's broker. Now, we had a great question in the chat right before I moved into this, saying that, hey, on the sales side of things, we've really been encouraging our sellers to not go ahead and offer compensation off the bat, to not give a specific number, and instead just go ahead and submit something and kind of see how things play out, right? We don't want to have our sellers basically guarantee a figure to a buyer broker, especially if that buyer broker really wasn't good at selling their worth. And maybe it's only 2% or 175 or whatever the case may be. The rental market works a little bit differently. In a buy-sale transaction, it's really simple for things to operate the way they were, but in the sense of wrapping in compensation into a purchase price, being able to kind of mortgage that, right? On the tenant side, you really can't roll it into a lease. We don't see a place listed for 3,000 a month and then saying, okay, I'm going to give you 3,200 a month, but I want you to go ahead and pay my tenant's broker. We're not seeing that happen. So because of that, it really is in your landlord's best interest, in my opinion, and you can have a different one, and that's completely fine. But in my opinion and our opinion, to still encourage our landlord to cooperate with tenants brokers. And what's the reasoning behind that? In a sale, all right, in a sale, the transaction is going to last 30 days or 45 days, maybe less. And people get their money and you move on. On a rental, it's a 12-month, 18-month, or 24-month relationship. And on a rental, what we find is we find that the best qualified tenants, the tenants with some of the best incomes and the best credit scores, are typically working with a broker. And in order to really find the best tenant to take care of a property, right, and to really minimize the risk and the exposure for a landlord, you want to have the most number of applicants there and the most number of eyes on that property. And therefore, that is why we believe it's in the landlord's best interest to still go ahead and offer that compensation. And here's the other thing. The compensation at the end of the day doesn't change for the landlord. We've shifted our listing agreements on a sale to only focus on list side compensation. But since we've still kept the minimum of 1 month's rent for our company as compensation to the landlord, it makes sense for that landlord, in my opinion, to use part of that compensation to go ahead and compensate a tenant broker to get as many people through the door as possible and the best quality people through the door as possible. So when this addendum is filled out, this is not adding compensation on top of 1 month's rent. It is basically pulling from that 1 month's rent. All right. Essentially making this listing agreement the same as a listing agreement we had pre-August 17th on the rental side. So for this, at the top of the addendum, you fill out the basic property information up there. And then you will see it's really paragraph number 3, where you go ahead and you put in there what the owner is paying. So this can be a specific dollar amount, or this can be half a month's rent or something along those lines. Whatever it is, you actually go ahead and you agree upon with your landlord. And then we do have a checkbox, right? Does your landlord authorize you to communicate this to the tenant broker, or does your landlord not authorize you? In my opinion, I think it is in your landlord's best interest to advertise this, because this is just how the rental market is working. Tenants do not have as much access to funds as a buyer may. Having to come out of pocket to pay their tenant broker may be a much bigger hindrance. So we really encourage that. And again, this is just what we're seeing right now in the current rental market. Paperwork for paying a tenant co-op broker. Okay. Owner agrees you can pay. All right. Awesome. They say, yes, you can go ahead and do it. Our compensation agreement can be used. Okay. That's great. We can sign a broker to broker agreement provided by a tenant broker, as long as it matches, all right, whatever your landlord agreed upon, all right, as long as it matches what we have in our agreement. Okay. And yes, if your landlord fills out that addendum, all right, saying that, hey, here's what we're going to pay, and we can go ahead and advertise that, I can pre-sign, or your managing broker can pre-sign that compensation agreement stating what we're paying, that you can go ahead and send to the tenant's broker. Okay. So they feel comfortable encouraging their client to go ahead and apply to your place. So that you can definitely go ahead and do. But I want to remind you of one really specific thing. There is no mention of compensation in the MLS. We can't upload this. And thanks again, Greg, for asking that question to remind me to cover this. You cannot upload that form to additional docs in the MLS. And I also want to remind you, if you are repping a landlord and you are cloning your old listing, double check your broker remarks. Our old MLS team, and a lot of you also got accustomed to doing this, would put into broker remarks for leases that were less than 12 months, commission or compensation would be prorated. So when you're cloning these old listings, that's auto-populating, and we've been hit with some fines because of it as a company. I'm getting some nasty grams from MRED about it. So please go ahead as you're cloning any kind of rental listings. Please double check what you have in that broker remarks paragraph. Okay, so we covered that. I have no new questions came in the chat for that, which I'm shocked. But do we have any questions on the list side? Debbie, hopefully I answered yours right there regarding basically talking about the compensation with the tenants broker. But are there any other questions on the list side? And again, if there are, you have my email address. It's Paul Blackburn at AT Properties. Go ahead and shoot that over to me. Are all these forms going to be in the rental packet? I'm going to double check, Trish. We have them all on printable docs right now. I'm going to double check to make sure that rental packet is up to date. And if we're missing one or two of them, I'll make sure Kinga goes ahead and has those added in for all of you. So that I will definitely check. Awesome. A client signed an agreement that doesn't address compensation. Can I have him just sign that landlord addendum as the landlord? I believe the answer is yes, if I'm understanding your question correctly, Phyllis. Shoot me an email and let me go ahead and make sure I'm looking at this correctly and giving you the correct answer for that. Let's see. First month's rent still paid. Is the tenant's first month's rent still payable to ACT? Great question on that, Christina. Yes. As of right now, yes, still payable to ACT, and we still will go ahead and facilitate paying that other brokerage. So that is totally fine. Yep, no problem at all. Let's see. Any updates to DMS tracking our BBA expiration dates? Good question on that. We were supposed to be adding that, I believe, Guido. So I can look into that. Shoot me an email, Guido, so I do not forget on that. Okay, and we'll look that up. Cool. Thank you, Robin, for the compliment. I'm trying to be as concise and informative and at least as upbeat as possible. I have a little bit of coffee left here, which I should drink a little bit of. All right, let's talk about the new Illinois application fee law, okay? I'm gonna try and get this done in under an hour. We may run over, I apologize. So this is the one thing a lot of you have reached out about to your MBs and to me and have been a little bit freaked out about. And excuse me, when this law first came out, I was like, you have got to be kidding me. What is going on here? Let me explain what this law is. And also, I'll drink a coffee. I got something in my throat. And really walk you through what's going on this side. So this basically took effect on January 1st. And this was passed a couple of months ago when we did some updates to the Illinois Landlord Tenant Act. This is separate from the RLTO. This applies to the entire state of Illinois. And one of the changes that they made was this, that if a tenant has had a recently prepared application with reports, okay, with reports that meet a specific criteria for the landlord, then the landlord is not allowed to charge the tenant for a new report. So essentially a tenant can come to you and say, hey, I just got denied down the street, or I lost out on multiple applications, and I have this information right here. I want to give this to the landlord, and this is now my application. And provided that application meets a specific set of criteria, okay, the landlord is not allowed to charge that tenant a new application fee. However, because when I first heard this, I go, what the hell? However, the landlord can still run all the same checks themselves through their own system. The difference is the landlord has to be the one to go ahead and pay for it. So why did this come up? What happened with this? So in the past couple of years, the rental market has been insane and truly insane. And brokers had different ways of kind of handling multiple applications, right? Sometimes they'd say, hey, we want everybody to apply. And people were paying high application fees, 100, 125, or even more, and they were losing out. And in some instances, they would apply to 4 or 5 places and they would lose. So our Illinois legislature, in their grandiose thought, said, here's a way to go ahead and fix this. We're going to now go ahead and pass this law stating that provided they are able to, get access to that application and have this data from a third party, and it's all good, et cetera, then the landlord is not going to be allowed to charge them a new application fee. The problem that comes in is that this, in my opinion, opens the door for massive, massive fraud. You basically can alter documents, and the landlord might not be all knowing. And there's enough fraud going on right now, in my opinion, in the rental landscape. We do not need any more of it. But this is kind of what we're dealing with. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of things here in a way to make sure your clients are still protected. So what qualifies as an acceptable report? Here are the 4 things that the state of Illinois has said qualifies as an acceptable, reusable report, all right, in which case your landlord cannot charge a new application fee to that tenant. Number 1, the report was prepared within the past 30 days by a consumer credit agency at the request and expense of the tenant. Okay, number 1. Number 2, that report is made directly available to the landlord to use in the rental application process or is provided by a third-party site. So they can't just say, hey, you can't charge me, I have this report. No, they have to make it fully available to the landlord to go ahead and review. The report is also available to the landlord at no cost. Okay, the tenant cannot try and charge the landlord for it, or the application company cannot go ahead and charge the landlord to access it. And most importantly, the report includes all the criteria consistently being used by the landlord in the screening process of the tenants. Meaning, if your landlord says, I want everything that we do as a company, right? Credits, we want to go ahead and run eviction checks, employment verification, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That right there has to have that, it has to meet that criteria. That's the important thing. Now, the one thing I want to mention on this is a similar law was passed in Colorado. And we were speaking to rentapplication.net, our servicer for our applications, and we were freaking out about it. We have multiple calls with Kinga and Joni and Amy, and we're talking with our provider. And they're like, look, it's not that big of a deal. This law passed in Colorado, and it was very rare for that reusable application to really meet all those criteria. And therefore, we didn't even have to like change our backend systems for it because it was so rare that we really encounter this that we were able to just make like some simple exceptions. So the one thing I want you to all realize is you probably will not run across this. You may, I'm going to give you some pointers on that. And when you do run across it, I want you to reach out to me or reach out to your managing broker just to confirm you're doing everything correctly. But let's quickly go over a few things that may happen. So let's pretend you are on the landlord side and you have some showings and somebody wants to apply and they go to you, hey, I have this application right here. It's within 30 days, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I want to send this to the landlord. Do not let them send it to you. If they do send it to you, if they do email to you, you do not want to open it. You're going to delete that email. You don't want to see the credit. You don't want to open that at all. Instead, you want to make sure that gets forwarded directly to your client, directly to the landlord, okay? That is 100% first and foremost. We still can use our rent application system site for them to go and fill out all the information free of charge, all the basic info to be sent to your landlord as well. That can still be done completely, okay? You also do not want to give specific advice to your landlord on what constitutes an acceptable run report, what constitutes an acceptable reusable report. Instead, we're going to have a link. When this video goes out, you are going to have a link to the Illinois Realtor website that specifies this and specifies the requirements we just went over. And it also will then have a link in there, which will take them to the state website, which specifically goes over what the new law is. Why are we saying this? I do not want you on the hook for saying, oh, yes, that's an acceptable report. And then 3 or 4 months down the road, something goes wrong with the tenant and they come back to you. So this is for your own protection. I get it. We are here to advise our clients and be experts in all knowing, but it's really important that we go ahead and we provide them with the links to their website and say, hey, if you are comfortable with this, great. But that is what we have to go ahead and do. Now, here's the final piece. If they come in with that reusable report and your landlord's like, oh yeah, this looks great, like credit's great, income's great, this person looks like somebody that I would love to have as my model tenant, advise your client this, still run the report. Pay for it and run the report through our system to make sure that everything they sent you is correct and checks out. So yes, advise the landlord, even if they find the report acceptable, to run their own report through our system and pay to confirm the results and avoid fraud. Extremely, extremely important to go ahead and do. Nothing in this new law prevents them from doing that. It just prevents them from charging the tenant back. All right, I see the chat blowing up here. So I'm going to go ahead and get into some of these things here. Let's see what we have. Does the report have to come from a third party? It does not, actually. I really wish that this law would have said the report had to come directly from the third party. It can come actually directly from the tenant to the landlord. We don't necessarily have like a soft pre-application form, but we do, I guess, if you want to consider the fact that they can go ahead in that situation and fill out rentapplication.net. We can set it to not charge them and basically just send that basic information that you would like fill out on an application, right? Move-in dates, income, things like that, directly to your landlord. We can do that through our current system without charging either party. Let's see here. There's a lot on here, so I know I'm going to miss a few of these. We are going to have an FAQ thing specifically on this. So your questions will be saved. I'll be able to kind of like go through them and make sure we get this filled out for an FAQ sheet on this application thing. Let's see. Many times my landlord will send me the reports after they receive them. Do I accept? No, never. Never, ever, ever. We cannot have anything like that in writing. We've been sued multiple times in scenarios, and all brokerages have, where basically they have pointed the finger at us saying, you advised me to take this tenant, and now I have to evict them, and I'm stuck with all these costs. And if there's proof that we reviewed that application with them and opened it and things like that, we can be held liable. So we want to make sure that we definitely avoid that. How does the landlord pay for the application if they choose to do so? Right now, it's a manual process. So basically, your office manager has the details on how to do this with our rent application system. They basically would take care of payment over the phone. Tenant would submit the information in the system, and then we can get your landlord on the phone with a rep from rentapplication.net to quickly take credit card info and go ahead and charge them that way, and then get the results right away. And the reason why it's manual is that rentapplication.net did not see a need to change their system because it's going to be that rare. If we do see this snowball and become a lot more common, we have a phenomenal relationship with them. They actually integrate with our DMS like really, really well. They can make changes for us if it does come to that point. We just don't see the need for that as of right now. Are PDFs okay to send this to the landlord, or is there a better way to go ahead and share? I think PDFs are fine. I mean, it's whatever system the tenant wants to go ahead and use to send to the landlord. We want to be as removed from this as possible, right? So it's like, here's a landlord's email. Go ahead and send that over. And we want to be as removed as possible. If this does become like a really common thing, which again, it wasn't in Colorado, I do not see it become a common thing here. We have talked about utilizing our rent application that partner to be able to upload securely through their system and then go directly to the landlord. So if it is a big thing, we will go ahead and we will kind of cross that bridge when we come to it. Does the tenant need to sign something allowing the landlord to run the report, even if the tenant is paying? Yes, Debbie, great question. Thank you for that. We will still use our rentapplication.net system. So they would still have to go in there, fill out all that information, and basically sign authorizing the whole thing. So they still will go through that same process as they did before, exactly the same. They simply will not be the ones paying, the landlord will. Let's see. Yes, we still have all the things on the listing agreement showing what the landlord wants run. Credit, eviction, ID verification, blah, 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 blah. So that's still all on the listing agreements, yeah. Cindy, landlord sent me some tenant reports to review once received. Are you saying that we are not to look at that? Yes, please do not. Trust me, I used to do a ton of rentals. I mean, I started during the financial crisis, and I was doing a lot of leasing and a good amount on the landlord side as well for some bigger developers. And I get it. It's difficult for us to be the true confidant that we are to our clients and not want to sit there and review and walk them through all of that. The problem is by us doing that, the liability is massive. The liability is huge, and on multiple levels. What the tenant is signing, for instance, is only authorizing the landlord to go ahead and look at that. So that's number one. So there's a breach of privacy there, but more importantly, if anything does come up, it can come back to bite us. And now being on the management side for 4 years and seeing that firsthand, seeing how someone's favorite clients can quickly go negative once a tenant in their property becomes a pain in the ass or stops paying or whatever it is, things can become ugly pretty quick. So just be very, very careful with that. Love that, Robin. Be the source of the source and no more. 100%. 100%. Let's see here. Who is responsible for communicating and asking if a tenant has recently paid for an application report? Great question, Megan. Didn't even think about bringing that up, but really the burden falls right now on the tenant. The tenant has to come to you and has to make that report available to the landlord. So you do not have to go out there and ask, hey, have you had a recently run report or anything along those lines? Burden falls on the tenant to go ahead and provide that report and make that report accessible. So fantastic question. Amy, if the landlord double checks and runs another credit report, does it really affect the applicant's credit score? It can. I'm not a credit expert. I can maybe ask somebody at one of our guys at Proper, guys or gals over there, and see what their thoughts are on that, and kind of go ahead and report back. We definitely want to make sure we're not necessarily giving credit advice to our prospective tenants coming into a property, because if it does affect their credit, or even if it doesn't, but they see a shift in their score, we don't want them coming back in and yelling at us. So, all right. So I think that covers a lot. There's a handful in here I'm still going to go ahead and get to, but let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. Email me. Again, email me. You got my email address. All right. We are going to run over today. I'm sorry, folks, but that's all right. I want to make sure we answer as many of these things as possible. So changes to the Chicago apartment lease, or really changes to Illinois law in general, that we have right now. There's really one that we're going to cover, and this is the main change, all right? The main change is, and this is for the state of Illinois, but Chicago does a great job of calling this out. It's the disclosure of property in a floodplain and or past flooding issues. Because why not add more things for somebody to disclose? So, and this really has become an issue. It's become an issue particularly with some garden units. Over the past few years, we've had some kind of crazy weather in many different areas, but particularly in some neighborhoods of Chicago, where we've seen a lot of garden units and first floor units flood. So this is now on the Chicago apartment lease. This is now required in the state of Illinois to go ahead and actually disclose, okay, if the property is in a floodplain. Now, this is really easy to look up. The website is actually here built into the disclosure. So you can go on the FEMA site, type in the address, and see if it is in a floodplain. And your landlord just has to go ahead and disclose that, right? Landlord is aware that the rental property, or is not aware that the property is located in a FEMA floodplain. They also want you to disclose if the property has experienced any flooding in the past 10 years. All right. So even if the property is not in a floodplain or a special service area like that, they still want you to go ahead and disclose that. Okay. And then we kind of want to double down again on this. And basically it's going to say, hey, the landlord is or is not aware that the rental property you are renting, they're speaking to the tenant now, all right, has flooded at least once in 10 years. So we're asking this again, right? The rental property has flooded X amount of times in the last 10 years. This, you have to make sure your clients fill out correctly. But there is a positive angle to this, and I'll tell you what that is. Number one, a lot of renters insurances do not cover, okay, flood damage. They don't. They cover things like if a pipe bursts and stuff like that, but a lot of rental policies do not cover stuff for the furniture and belongings if there is a flood, because they are specifically in a floodplain or you just have random flooding. Additional insurance can always sometimes be bought for that, but this is the one thing that we want to make sure we go ahead and disclose. Failure to disclose this, all right, definitely will open you up or open your client up to liability. Also, basically, essentially allowing the tenant to possibly break the lease and kind of move on, especially in the city of Chicago. Here's the good thing: is we have noticed some issues in the past where a landlord has rented out their property. There was some past flooding, or maybe it was in a floodplain or something along those lines. Flooding then happens, tenant loses their stuff. They then sue the landlord saying, you should have told me this, you should have told me this. And specifically in Chicago and Cook County, which is extremely, extremely, extremely tenant friendly, your landlord's not in a good place. So as much as this is a new added disclosure, at the end of the day, provided your landlord's being honest, it actually does protect them and give them some added protection here, because they are disclosing what they know, and it's right here. So make sure you're paying attention to that. That is the one big change that we see right here. So if the basement has flooded but the top units have not, do you still have to disclose? So if you are not renting out, so we're talking right here about the actual rental property, the actual unit itself, is really what they are talking about. Keep in mind, if you are in a floodplain, regardless, that disclosure has to go ahead and take place. But we are talking about the specific rental unit that this lease actually goes ahead and pertains to. But keep in mind, if it's a duplex or something like that going down, you're disclosing it. But I get what you're saying. Like if you have a 3-unit building, you're on the 3rd floor, and for some reason the basement flooded or whatever it is, you provided there's no like shared space down there, or maybe common storage or things like that. Nothing really to go ahead and disclose. I can double check that with our attorney, but that's the way that I've read that. So let's see here. See, if a landlord, in-depth question from Zoe. All right, Zoe, what do we got here? So the landlord owned a unit for 1 year, no flooding. Do they have to go back to their purchase disclosures regarding flooding and checkbox and see if there's anything on their real property disclosure? Oh, that's a great question. I like that question. So Zoe's basically saying, hey, I've owned this property for 1 year. I've experienced no flooding, but on the disclosure, when I bought the property, there was flooding mentioned on that disclosure. The way I would perceive this, again, not an attorney, is I, as the owner, have been made aware of that flooding because of that previous disclosure. So once I signed that disclosure, when I purchased the property, I was made aware of flooding. Therefore, now and forever, I'm aware of flooding in the basement. So at that point, I would say, yes, you do have to go ahead and disclose. That's my train of thought in that, Zoe, for you, but good question. Good question. And guess what? There's also a paper trail with that, right? So God forbid something happens, those records could always go ahead and be subpoenaed. So that's a great advice. Pull up those old disclosures. Make sure your landlords are actually really thinking this through when they are filling this out. Let's see, will the disclosures and listing agreement be available through DocuSign, stuff like that? Yes, and this now is built into the brand new lease. So the portion I'm showing you right here is not a separate agreement. This is part of the lease. It's built in there. So if you're using the Chicago apartment lease, you will not have to worry. It is there. All right, let's move on to the next thing. Keeping things fair. Okay, we'll talk about a couple things here to keep you all out of trouble. If you have any really specific questions on what we're about to talk about, send me an email. You can toss them in the chat, but if you have specific scenarios, send me an email, because we're going to go over some things like fair housing and a few things here just really quickly. This is not a fair housing class. This is just a very, very quick top line items for all of you on this topic to make sure we're doing whatever we can to keep you out of trouble. So keeping things fair. All right. We're going to be going over consistent qualification strategy really quick. We're going to give you some ESA reminders. We're going to talk about some Section 8 or voucher reminders for you. And then I'm going to remind you of know when to refer, okay? So landlord, develop a strategy from the start. When you are meeting with them and you are going over the listing agreement, I want you to have a strategy from that very point in time of what you are willing to accept, what you want in that next tenant. I want you to be setting minimum credit requirements, okay? This is a credit score. It has to be specific. It can't be great credit, excellent credit. Now, that can be misinterpreted many different ways. What's great for you ain't great for somebody else. So it has to be specific. 680, 700, 720, something along those lines that your landlord says, that's what I want as my minimum. Income requirements. You can set a monthly income requirement, all right? Usually, this is phrased as a certain amount of monthly rent, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, whatever, the amount of monthly rent as an income requirement. And then other things can also be added, such as no evictions, no bankruptcies, no open collections on a credit report, things along those lines. Whatever those requirements are, there's 2 things I want you to do with those. This is going to really help protect you in the event anything comes back to bite you. And it also helps set clear expectations from the very beginning with your landlord and keeps them from making a mistake. I want you to write these additional provisions on the listing agreement. We have that new additional provisions portion on the listing agreement, that blank box at the end. I want you to write in what the landlord says they want as minimum requirements, have your landlord initial right next to it, okay? Great way to go ahead and provide and protect you. I then want to make sure that you are writing those minimum requirements in the broker remarks on the MLS, all right? This way, nobody can say that, hey, you allowed me to apply, but you did not tell me what the minimum requirements are. I want my money back. This keeps things simple, all right? And remember this, if you mention it to one person, mention it to all, all right? If every single time somebody, when someone calls you from Zillow, whatever it is, says, hey, I want to go ahead and see this place, make sure if you're mentioning the minimum requirements to one person, you are mentioning to every single person that calls. There are testers out there that are calling and may say one thing or sound a certain way, whatever the case may be, and seeing how brokers act. All right, seeing how open they are to showings, and also seeing if they are being really strict on minimum requirements with one set of people versus another set of people. So make sure if you mention it to one, you mention it to all. Consistency across the board. It's the way we should be operating anyways, no matter what. All right, ESA animals. All right, let's talk about this really quickly. Here's a few things I want you to know, okay? An ESA animal is not considered a pet, all right? And also know, if you have any questions on this, all right, and you're repping a landlord or a tenant, and ESA things come up, reach out to me or reach out to your managing broker. And most of your managing brokers are really proficient at this. They really know this stuff regardless of if they cover an area that does a lot of rentals. But definitely make sure you reach out. An ESA animal is not considered a pet. That's number one, okay? Number two, it cannot be denied even if the listing says no pets. All right. It can say no pets. You can scream no pets from the rooftop. It cannot be denied. You cannot charge additional rents, okay, for an ESA animal. You cannot charge an additional deposit for an ESA animal. You cannot charge an additional fee for an ESA animal. If an ESA animal is moving into a condo building, all right, and your client is a landlord, owns a condo in a condo building, and there is a pet fee for the association cannot charge that to the tenant or even to the landlord, because an ESA animal is just that, an ESA animal and not a pet. So that's really important to remember. What is proof of an ESA animal? This changed roughly about 4 or 5 years ago. We had a new law in Illinois signed in, and this new law said that it's not necessarily the animal, all right, that we are seeing as ESA, it is the person, okay? So now, instead of those old fake certificates, right? People would go online and say, oh, my dog's ESA, and they download a certificate for $200. No, they now need a letter from either a licensed therapist, licensed physician, doctor, counselor, something along those lines, prescribing an ESA animal to the tenant, to the person in question. Sometimes there'll be specifics in those letters. So they'll name the dog's name, they'll name whatever. Other times they'll just say they're allowed to have an ESA. And yes, that does suffice. If you come across these issues, okay, reach out to your MB. If you come across them, please make sure you reach out ahead of time. Do not guess. If you deny somebody because of this, or you try and charge them, all right, very, very easy. for your landlord to get fined, and for you to get fined on this. So make sure you are just asking the right questions. I'm going to quickly jump on the chat here really fast. Alexa Bennett, I was asked recently if a snake can be an ESA animal. Yeah, you're right. It is the year of the snake, so maybe. Zoe, at what point must you disclose you have an ESA? An ESA animal can be disclosed at any point in time. At any point in time, it can be disclosed. Before the process, before the application, afterwards, you can be mid-lease and say, oh, I'm now going to go ahead. I've been prescribed an ESA. So because that ESA goes with that person, and in theory, they could move in with no ESA, and then 2 months later get prescribed that, right? Boom, it can be basically disclosed at any point in time. So, all right, I'm going to quickly keep going on this right now. But again, any of these questions you specifically want answered, by all means, feel free to go ahead and reach out to me directly, and we're really happy to go ahead and help you. Maggie, does this apply to landlords who own 2 to 4 flats, lives in one of the units? Yes, it still does. There are a couple of caveats. One, it's definitely going to apply to you because you're a broker, so we still have that issue. But the law basically reads the only time an ESA can be denied. It reads very open in the sense of the ESA has to pose a direct threat to somebody. There's no additional definition outside of that. So if you are in a very precarious situation, and these are going to be rare, 99.9% of scenarios will not apply. 99.99 will not apply. But for the 0.0001% where it does apply to, reach out to us. We can connect you with an attorney or something like that to make sure things are going right. But just remember that chances are your scenario, I don't want to sound like an ass, but probably doesn't apply. Landlords are always trying to finagle certain ways, and no, it's usually not the way it works. Voucher and Section 8 reminders. Really quick, this is not going to be a voucher class. We're going to have something separate on this, but I really want to go ahead and drive a few points home right now. Voucher is income. You cannot deny on this source of income, okay? You cannot. A voucher is income, all right? Somebody calls you, says, do you accept Section 8? Of course. You're more than welcome to schedule a showing. You're more than welcome to go ahead and apply, okay? You cannot refuse to show a property because the property is not Section 8 approved. You cannot do that. You cannot say, I know this property will not pass. I'm not going to go ahead and show it because of that. Nope, you cannot do it. You have to go through that. Nope, not do the showing. Okay, go ahead and do the showing. You cannot deny them the right to apply because there's a voucher involved. All right. Nope, can't do that. And it does not need to be disclosed until the application. All right. Nobody, if they have a voucher, they do not need to disclose they have a voucher. All right. The only time they have to is up until it becomes time to go ahead and apply. And the reason why it has to be disclosed at application is because that voucher is going to be used as income. So it is going to have to be shown as proof of income at that point in time. Screening process for vouchers. Same application process. Okay. So somebody comes in with a voucher, you still can go ahead and have minimum credit requirements and all that kind of stuff, even though the voucher is guaranteed income. You still can go ahead and do that. So it's the same requirements that you're going to utilize for non-voucher voucher holders as you will for voucher holders, okay? And voucher is income, all right? It is guaranteed income. Therefore, income requirements can only pertain to the portion that the tenant has to come out of pocket to pay. So let me give you an example of this, all right? In most cases, most vouchers are not 100%. There are some that are, but the majority that are out there, the tenant is paying something. So let's pretend we have a place for $2,000 a month, okay, listed for rent, and we have a voucher for $2,000 a month, and that voucher stipulates that the tenant pays $200, all right? So we have Section 8 or HUD paying $1,800, and the tenant is paying $200. Now let's pretend one of your requirements is 3 times monthly rent, that anybody who comes in, all right, has to make at least 3 times the monthly rent. So in this case, $6,000, right? Because the rent's $2,000 to qualify for this place. For that voucher holder, it's not 3 times the $2,000 voucher, it's 3 times their portion. Okay, so their portion is $200. It's 3 times $200, which for those who are not great at math, is $600. So the tenant would just need to make $600 a month to qualify or to meet that income qualification on that. So that's how the income requirements work when it comes to vouchers. Again, this is not a vouchers class, but these are the few questions that I get a lot of when people are asking me about vouchers and qualifications. So I did want to go ahead and kind of cover that. And I also want to remind you this, know when to refer, okay? Really know when to refer to somebody else that is proficient at rentals. I really, really stress this. I've currently taken over the rental division, so that's now under my purview. And we have some phenomenal agents that do this all of the time. I want you to be asking yourself, can I give my client the best service? Can I give my client a great experience? And then, am I also exposing my client to unneeded risk, both the landlord or the tenant? And am I exposing myself to unneeded risk? I understand inventory might be low right now, and a lot of us are doing anything we can to make sure that we have some transactions. But if you find yourself in a situation where you don't believe you can really go ahead and give your tenant or your landlord the best service possible and the service that they truly honestly deserve, then by all means, please go ahead and refer them off. I know there are a lot of people too that have worked with tenants who have vouchers and they really want to help them and help them find a great place, but they don't know the voucher system. It's okay to go ahead and refer those off to somebody who's proficient in that, because it's really important to understand that through the voucher process, a lot of times the tenants may know what they're doing, but the other brokers are not that familiar. And in order to really secure a great place for that voucher holder, it's really important for you to be in a position to educate the other broker on the other side if they don't understand that process. So it's really, really important to make sure that your clients are working with somebody that truly understands things. So if you need a referral, by all means, you can go ahead and send something to rental division at appproperties.com. That's under my purview. I have a phenomenal person that kind of helps monitor that inbox and make sure we pair you with a great person. So I'm going to quickly jump through some questions right here. And again, feel free to go ahead and email me. Yeah, are there some resources when it comes to like working with Section 8 vouchers and things along those lines? We'll be sending some of those out. Right now, what we're trying to do is actually get somebody, and we had someone a few years ago from HUD to really come in and really explain the entire process and also talk about all the resources that are available to you as a broker, both on the landlord and tenant side, as well as resources available to those tenants to make sure that they are getting the right access that they actually need. So it really would be great, and we're hoping to get something like that set up something soon. Lisa K, can you ask the amount of the voucher? 100%. Yes, you want to ask the amount of the voucher, regardless if you're on the landlord side or if you are on the tenant side. And if you're on the tenant side, you also want to ask if they actually have their, do they have their voucher paperwork? Do they have that? Do they have that actually ready to go? Sometimes some people will jump into the system thinking they'll get it right away, and it sometimes will take a little bit to go ahead and get that. And the one thing I do want to say on the Section 8 side of things, and when it comes to vouchers, and having worked with them on both the landlord side and even having them rent one of my properties in the past, the average stay for, at least this was the average a few years ago, the average stay for a voucher holder in a property is about 5.5 years. So if you have, especially investors that want long-term tenants, this is pretty much guaranteed income and someone who's going to stay there for the long haul. So for your investors, in my opinion, it's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. So that's my honest goodness, 2 cents on that. So especially when you have those investors who are like, you know what, I don't want to be dealing with turnover every couple of years. You really do see longevity in those leases. So let's see here. If there's anything else on here. Do we only handle rentals in the city for rental division? No, we handle them in the suburbs as well. So we have people in the suburbs, we have people all over. We may not have people listed on the rental division in different markets. So if you go to look people up, they're mostly city people, but we do have connections at each office that are like our go-to rental people that we send things in. So feel free to go ahead and reach out. So Robert, so they decide that they don't want to pay the extra amount needed after the voucher to match the rents. Could we kind of deny them? Could they be denied in this scenario because they're not willing to go ahead and pay the amount? Yes. So a couple of things happen with Section 8, and just very quickly, is you may have somebody with let's say a $2,000 voucher, and your asking rent is 2,000. Section 8 comes out and they do two things. They do a quick inspection, and they also do what they call a determination of rent. And they're going to do this quick inspection, but they're also figuring out, basically, is this place worth $2,000? And they have a metrics that they use. And let's say Section 8 comes back and says, nope, this is only worth 1,700. You don't have to accept that 1,700. You've not signed a lease. You've just entered the voucher process. So if it doesn't match the rent that you want for the property, there's no need for you to have to move forward at that point in time, just because Section 8 came back and said your place is only worth 1,700. We actually don't see it happen too often, but it actually it actually does happen. So let's see, what else do we have here? If Section 8 voucher holder applies for a property and meets all landlord requirements and would be accepted, when would the lease be signed? Before or after inspection? Great question, iPhone 467. So in that case, here's how it works. I'll give you the quick breakdown of this. And this is a very high level on this, okay? Voucher holder comes in, says, I want to apply for your property. Your landlord goes, awesome. Here's the application link. They fill everything out. They say, here's my proof of income. Here's what I got. Everything comes back exactly what the landlord wants. Credit, income, your landlord's happy as a clam. All right. And then what happens is two things. Two things happen next. This voucher paperwork gets filled out with the tenant's information, landlord information, property information. It gets submitted to HUD. Okay. HUD does a little background check on your landlord, making sure that they kind of haven't defrauded HUD or anything like that. Make sure that they're kind of ready to go. And it double checks the voucher holder paperwork, make sure all that's in line, property fits within the requirements, all that kind of stuff. Then that triggers basically an inspection / a determination of value. And what happens at that point is you go on a queue, and then somebody comes out and does that check. Once that check comes back and the determination of value comes back, and they go, great, we are going to be happy moving forward at $2,000 a month, et cetera, landlord, here's your paperwork to go ahead and sign. It's at that point that you sign the lease with that tenant. It's at that point. It's only once HUD has confirmed that they are paying and they are moving forward. Because what you don't want to have happen is put that tenant on the hook for rent, right? It actually may not pass Section 8 inspection, right? Or may not come out with a determination of value. So good thing is most of these tenants know that really, really well. If they're in the program, they've had to go through education classes and things like that. As a matter of fact, your landlord, once approved, will actually have to do a little bit of an online training class for that as well. So they'll be fully up to date on how the process and how the system works too. And yes, you would still go ahead and use the car lease. It would be, yep, you go ahead and use the same lease. You'll have separate voucher paperwork that you would use to go ahead and kind of guarantee that payment, but you still would be using the same exact lease. And then what if you have multiple potential tenants that want to apply maybe for a sooner move-in or something like that prior to the inspection happening? And that's the thing, just because you're going through the process and you have an inspection coming up in, what you believe is coming up in a week or 2 weeks, doesn't mean that you have to stop showing the property or remove the property, from the market. So you still can go ahead and show. And I think that's also been like the biggest misnomer when it comes to Section 8 and HUD, is that they believe that once they enter this process, they're kind of handcuffed to it, and it's really not the case. I have found that I had some landlords that I have represented in the past, they actually had no problem waiting a few extra weeks because they figured that tenant was going to be there for a few extra years compared to the average tenant coming in, and it was also guaranteed income. And I saw this during COVID. Like during COVID, when people were losing jobs, and also when evictions were stayed, right, and you couldn't evict anybody for a while. I had one landlord in particular that really, really wanted somebody with a voucher in there, and we actually found a fantastic tenant. And she goes, "I love it. I can sleep at night knowing that my rent's gonna be paid." So, all right. So that's all of it right there. There are some more questions in there. In the interest of time, almost an hour and a half. And for those of you who have stuck around with me, God bless you all. So email me. Paul Blackburn at atproperties.com. Don't email rental division. That's for referrals. All right. So Paul Blackburn at atproperties.com. Shoot me an email with any other questions that you may have. And we definitely will go ahead and help you out. Reach out to your managing brokers. They're going to have FAQs. You will have a copy of this recording being sent out to you as well, along with a couple of those links regarding the application process and things like that. So by all means, ask questions before you get yourself into a bad situation. Thank you all for being on here, and enjoy the beautiful day. Like, go to the beach or get a margarita. It's gonna be like 51 degrees today. So enjoy your day. Thank you all. Take care.